Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for joining us. This webinar is a launch event for our latest FinTech report, which we published in May. And it's an opportunity for us to engage with the industry on some key themes. Firstly, let me apologise for my lack of video. Like many of you, I'm sure, on my laptop camera has finally given up the ghost, and it's lost the will to continue after over 400 video calls in about 102 days since lockdown. Anyway, I have a face for radio, so I think that's probably better for all of you. I'd like to set the scene, first of all, before we turn to the first of our panelists. Alex is going to make a presentation. We're currently seeing the way that people think about and use digital technology is undergoing a radical transformation. That was already in place before COVID-19, but I think we've all experienced how things have changed and we've become more reliant on technology ever since. And this presents a pressing need to ensure that our regulatory approach continues to be robust and internationally competitive. And doing so is vital to the kind of post-19 COVID-19 recovery that we're going to be engaged in, and it's going to need to be there to ensure customer needs at the heart of this. I'd just like to make 3 or 4 points, firstly, to frame today's conversation and topic. Firstly is around the ecosystem. I think the role of government and regulators has been fundamental to the success of the UK's FinTech industry, which now has over 1,600 firms operating across the country. Secondly, in terms of thought leadership, the FCA has led the way implementing world-leading initiatives such as the regulatory Sandbox, and the FCA support services have received over 1,600 applications and provided support to nearly 700 firms of a whole range of different sizes and maturities. It's also developed policy and thought leadership pieces on topics including crypto assets and machine learning. The third thing is about real practical help. The FCA has also recently published a report setting out its approach to tech sprints, which the FCA uses to shape the direction of innovation both in areas of technology and where wider issues, such as financial crime, persist in the market. And these are also how companies develop their own technologies. So that's great that they are engaged in the same practical processes. And I think lastly, and possibly most important, is influence. Clearly, the FCA and other regulators have a significant degree of soft power and influence across the world as participants in other markets look to the UK as an example of what they can learn. I've got a great example of one country which adopted the UK Sandbox, and it copied and pasted even to the degree of using the same font and the same spelling mistakes. I won't name and shame the country, but it's a great example of how that soft power and influence really exerts itself. And the UK should look to capitalise on this as we consider how to recover from the COVID-19 crisis. So I think it's clear that these initiatives have been a cornerstone of the UK's FinTech success. But we really want to make sure that we're not being complacent, and we want to seek to encourage the conversation of what would be done to ensure the UK's approach to innovation remains world-changing and how we can remain competitive on a global stage. So first of all, after all of those comments, I'm just going to outline the format. We're going to have a presentation, which is going to be delivered by Alexander McGill from PA Consulting, and then some reflections from the panel members before a wider discussion takes place with panelists taking questions from the audience. To start off with, the audience will be muted for the duration of the seminar, and questions can be submitted there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. You can submit questions via that, and then those will be answered after the presentation. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Alex, who's going to run through the findings from the report. Alex, over to you.
Many thanks, Marcus, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Hopefully you can hear me and see me. My name is Alex McGill, and I'm a regulatory expert at PA Consulting, and lead our work in regulatory innovation and financial services, and was also the lead researcher and drafter of this report in collaboration with wider colleagues at PA and the City UK as well. So I'm really excited by the opportunity to talk to you today about our findings and recommendations from the report. And just wanted to take 10 minutes to run you through these before handing over to our panel to discuss further questions and elements of the report. So within the presentation, there'll be 2 polling questions where we're going to ask for your opinions on some of the report's key themes, which we'll get to shortly. So PA agreed earlier last year to work with the City UK to conduct a piece of research with a brief look at how the regulatory environment in the UK could be further enhanced to promote FinTech and innovation in financial services. So we conducted the research over a 6-month period through a combination of desk-based research, internal interviews with our FinTech and regulatory SMEs within PA, but also with external interviews with over 20 experts across the industry, many of which are with us today. And these experts included directors from UK and US regulators, senior executives from international banks and fintechs, along with fintech specialists from government, so right across the wider fintech ecosystem that plays a really important role in this. And we're grateful to everyone that we interviewed for their time and the insights they provided, which really did help us to shape the report. The report's overarching Marcus touched upon looked at how, in the last 10 years, the FCA had delivered many pioneering and highly successful innovation initiatives in order to deliver on their competition mandate and ensure the UK financial services industry delivers the best service for customers. Their successes led to many people referring to the FCA as the most innovative regulator in the world, and that's something they really hold dearly. And these initiatives include the regulatory Sandbox, their innovation RegTech and tech sprints, and the new bank startup unit, which they deliver in collaboration with Bank of England. And these initiatives, amongst others, have played a significant role in the UK's booming fintech industry. Now, our report looked at how UK regulators could build on this success and deliver the next wave of regulatory innovation, which will help to develop and strengthen the UK as one of the leading global fintech hubs. However, what we found is that this can't be achieved by regulators alone, and therefore the report really focused on how industry could work with regulators to collaboratively improve the UK's innovation and fintech environment. And Alex, if you wouldn't mind just flicking to the slide now. Thanks, Alex. So our report's key findings and recommendations are divided into 4 sections. And the first of these was on clarifying regulatory support and engagement. And this was around making sure it was straightforward and as easy as possible for fintechs to navigate regulatory materials and gain access to the fantastic support which is available from both regulators and industry bodies. The second theme was focused on building on the previous success by delivering new initiatives to promote fintech innovation. And within this, we looked at the success of the FCA's regulatory Sandbox and provided recommendations for how this could be further developed and improved. The third area we looked at was integrating innovation across the supervisory framework that exists. And within this, we looked at how regulators can continue to disseminate the knowledge and capability that they've developed within their innovation arms into their core supervisory and authorization teams. And the fourth area we looked at was how we can strengthen support of fintech expansion into international and overseas markets. And what we found there is that when looking at the newly formed Global Financial Innovation Network and also the UK and US regulatory collaboration, there's a significant opportunity for us to work with those regulators and help fintechs to expand from UK markets abroad. So within this presentation, I'm going to briefly take you through the key findings and starting with theme 1, clarifying regulatory support and engagement. So in the UK, there's a number of excellent resources that are available for fintechs to help them set up and develop their business. And these have been developed by regulators and an increasing number of industry bodies. However, the key challenge for fintechs is knowing how to find all this information, as it's currently spread across different initiatives without a central home. Another challenge that we found for fintechs was interpreting these resources. And while there's outstanding pockets of material that have been specifically tailored for fintechs and startups, such as the New Bank Startup Guide, which provides clearly and concisely written material on how authorizations for new banks works. What we found is that other guides, such as the FCA's guidance on PSD2 for e-money providers or institutions, was more difficult to understand where you were a non-regulatory SME, which is typically the kind of cohort that's looking to start up a new fintech venture. So our key recommendation in this theme was for regulators and industry to work together to promote all initiatives which support the fintech industry and to continue to refine some of the advisory materials in line with the high standards they've set by the New Bank Startup Unit guidance materials. Our second theme was focused on building on the successes by launching new initiatives to further drive innovation. The FCA launched Innovate in 2014 with the aim of tackling regulatory barriers to innovation. And this initiative included 3 strands: a direct support service, an advice unit, and their crown jewel, the Regulatory Sandbox. The FCA launched the world's first Regulatory Sandbox in 2016 and has since supported over 100 Fintechs and established firms to conduct tests with innovative new products and business models. In our report, we discussed how the Sandbox can be further improved and to continue to support innovation in the next decade and beyond. And the report referenced 4 key areas for potential improvement of the Regulatory Sandbox. And these are: 1, creating a new digital sandbox which allows for sharing of sanitized data between firms to test data analytics and AI solutions. 2, developing a mechanism for providing accreditations for B2B Fintechs, which verifies the maturity of their business. 3, expanding the sandbox to include multiple tiers, which facilitates lighter touch testing ahead of more formal applications. And 4, introducing sector and technology specific sandboxes to focus on addressing specific challenges which emerge in sub-sectors of the market. For example, a specific sandbox to focus on life and pensions, or a specific sandbox to address new and emerging regulatory risks such as climate risk or sustainability. Now, the FCA's data strategy announced earlier this year shows that they're already looking at ways to improve the regulatory sandbox, with a focus on facilitating tests which require data sharing between organisations. So we're keen to hear your thoughts on this, and it's time for our first polling question. So Alex, if you wouldn't mind bringing up the polling question, please. So hopefully you can all see that on the screen. What we would like you to answer is, in your opinion, which of the 4 potential improvements that I outlined above for the FCA's regulatory sandbox would bring most value to the industry? So the questions and options should be on your screen, and we'll give you 30 seconds to answer those. Fantastic. Thanks for those who responded. We'll be discussing the results with the panel a bit later on in the session. The third theme from our report looked at how innovation and technical expertise was distributed across the regulators. And the interviews showed that there was almost unanimous praise for the technical capability that was hosted within innovation arms within UK regulators. And that's been a strategic focus for UK regulators as they look to ensure that they are fit for purpose and increasingly digitised and data-driven within the industry. A good example of this is the FCA, where they have 100 people in their innovation department focused on data analytics, RegTech, and supporting innovation across the industry. Now, this is the largest regulatory innovation headcount in the world within regulators, and there's still plans to expand this further and increase headcount by a significant amount within the next year. However, one of the things we identified within interviews was that the level of technical expertise within core regulatory departments focused on supervision and innovation was not comparable to innovation arms. And on occasion, this resulted in new and emerging firms with new business lines and products having an excellent experience within the regulatory sandbox, where they developed a common understanding of the technology and the regulatory approach for a new product with their innovation regulatory colleagues, only to be, quote, chucked over the fence, end quote, to the supervisory teams who perhaps didn't appreciate or understand some of the nuances as well as their colleagues within the innovation arms did. So our recommendation for UK regulators is to really focus on disseminating this technical capability that they've built within innovation arms into their core teams, as well as continuing to grow the overall innovation headcount to ensure that every team has the appropriate capability profile that they need to continue to foster and encourage innovation. Lastly, we looked at the regulatory barriers to launching fintech propositions in overseas markets. And the emphasis of this research was focused on the US, due to its strategic importance as a UK trading partner and the current focus from UK-based Fintechs to try and break into this market. Now, the FCA strategically engaged with US regulators in a number of ways, including expanding its tech sprints to involve US regulators. Now, tech sprints are essentially hackathons for industry and regulatory participants to work together to develop RegTech solutions. And in July 2019, the tech sprint was focused on international approaches to combating anti-money laundering. And the FCA hosted a US satellite event with 3 US regulators and over 100 people present. The second way that the FCA engages with global regulators is through the leading role they've played in the establishment and running of what's called the Global Financial Innovation Network, or GFIN. And GFIN is a global network which now contains over 50 regulators from all over the world and includes 6 regulators from the US. And GFIN has 2 major goals, the first of which is to provide a more effective way for innovative firms to engage with regulators across borders. And secondly, to align on regulatory approaches to tackling some of the industry's biggest challenges, including approaches to combating financial crime, but also standardizing regulatory reporting. So with that, it's time for our second polling question. And same as last time, please put your answers from the pop-up, and I'll go over these to make sure that they are clear. So that should now be on your screen. But of the question, which of the following areas would you most like to see GFIN focused on? Is it 1, developing a common international approach and standard for regulatory reporting? Is it 2, harmonizing international approaches to tackling financial crime? Is it 3, creating a more harmonized regulatory authorizations approach across different countries and regions? Or is it 4, facilitating international collaboration to implement future regulations, e.g. new and emerging regulation around climate risk? So again, we'll give you 30 seconds to respond, and we will look at the results with that a bit later on in the session. Fantastic. So to conclude, in the past decades, UK regulators, and in particular the FCA, have laid the foundations for a new kind of financial services regulator, one that fosters and promotes innovation rather than stifles it. The work of UK regulators so far has significantly contributed to the success of the UK as a global fintech hub. And Judge Business School researchers found the UK to have the world's best regulatory environment for fintech and innovation in financial services. However, through the report, what we found is that the industry can't rest on its laurels, and there remains a huge amount of work to be done to continue to drive this forward. And we're only at the beginning of this transformational journey, and we believe this is a significant opportunity for industry, regulators, and government to collaborate and secure the long-term future of the UK as a global centre for innovation in financial services. So thanks very much, Marcus. I'll hand back over to you now. You can take us through the next part.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alex. That's fantastic. And in just a second, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves and just make a few comments on those 4 themes that we saw from the report, including how they think the ecosystem can work together to maintain this world-leading regulatory approach. Magdalena, if I could turn to you first, I wonder if you could just sort of make some comments on this and give us a few minutes of where you think the UK needs to go next.
Great. So I'll start with a little bit of an introduction to myself and kind of where I sit. So my name is Magdalena. I head up Barclays Global FinTech platform Rise, leading the strategic direction to help Barclays create more meaningful relationships with new innovative firms. The mission for Rise is to connect technology, talent, and trends in the fintech ecosystem and to accelerate innovation and growth in the financial industry as a whole. So collaboration is very, very much important to us, and connecting into resources such as the FCA Sandbox. So just a brief overview of RISE. We have 4 physical sites globally. Obviously, they're closed at the moment because of the COVID situation, but we have 4 sites in London, New York, Tel Aviv, and Mumbai, and we have around 170 fintech companies based in our sites, and over 1,000 individual members. And that's really kind of where we see the connectivity into these over 170 companies, is the connectivity to the technology that's out there and that's being built. And this is not including our kind of alumni network, which is an additional like 300 companies. And the individual members that we have, those are really like the talent that we see are going to be building the future of financial services. So at RISE, we really aim to support fintech and build and scale new products and services. And we look to provide the best connectivity into resources that will accelerate the innovation and the growth. We've worked very closely with FCA, having 2 very, very talented secondees from FCA based in our team. And this, I think this really demonstrates as a regulator, it really demonstrates the appetite to ensure that the talent that they employ has close connectivity into innovation and financial services. So I think, that's a key highlight. Some kudos to FCA on driving those initiatives. But it also has helped, and this comes back to kind of how the ecosystem works together. It also has helped our fintechs that we're working with, specifically here in the UK, to better connect into FCA and connect with the Sandbox and the different initiatives that they're running. And we've had quite a few of our members going through the Sandbox. And kind of in the interest of the discussion today, I will probably mirror more the insight I gather from the fintechs rather than Barclays. I found the report really, really interesting, and it really highlights some important aspects of the Sandbox. And working closely with fintechs who are seeking authorization in some way, and I've realized that it's being a fintech startup is probably one of the most challenging kind of entrepreneurial journeys that you can start. If you look at the FCA authorization process, it kind of goes against every lean startup methodology out there. They ask for a lot of details. It has to be very well thought through, and you really have to understand. And it is really important that we go through this process, but it's how do we find that balance between allowing technology and entrepreneurs to do what they do best in experimenting and thinking outside the box, whilst also kind of protecting consumers and protecting the industry through the regulation. So yeah, I think it is more important than ever to continue and pushing boundaries and collaboration, and looking forward to further discuss this today.
Wonderful. Really appreciate that, Magdalena. And I just wondered if I could ask you one quick question as a follow-up to that before we move on to the other panelists. One of the key challenges that a lot of fintechs and also their partners indicate is that difficulty of scaling up internationally. And you've got that unique experience with Barclays and RISE, because you've got it in 4 sites in 4 different jurisdictions, 2 of which are massive markets for the UK financial services in India and the US. And I just wondered, how have you found that engagement between the regulators in different international markets? And does it help or does it hinder the fintechs that you're working with?
To be completely honest, I don't think, as an immediate thought of how they expand into new markets, it's not the first port of call. It's usually focused on kind of the opportunity with clients and customers and the opportunities in that market. So, but I do see a lot of the potential of with a lot of other regions kind of copying what FCA has done. It's making it easier for them, and there's a lot of kind of the trade missions that are going out to different regions are really helping and supporting to connect into the relevant resources when you export internationally.
Wonderful, thank you. Diana, you're on that journey as an entrepreneur and a founder of a fintech company. How have you found that? I wonder if you could just introduce yourself first and then maybe just give us a flavour of that journey and your interactions with the regulatory authorities.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Diana Paredes, the CEO and co-founder of Suede. We're a RegTech company. As Marcus just mentioned, we are, I guess, part of the people in the trenches, and I think in many ways, at the same time, the ecosystem in the UK has been just so powerful that it's allowed companies like ours, who, for example, are pretty much a bootstrap business. We haven't had to fundraise to literally go from what I like to call zero to Davos, where effectively with just being able to demonstrate the value of our product and getting good customers, from the beginning, it has allowed us to basically become profitable and sustainable very quickly, which obviously in a period like COVID has been, demonstrably a great place to be. So what we do is that fundamentally we have the most performant system in the market. We can normalize and clean large amounts of data for a regulatory output that we can process for the purposes of, doing a regulatory computation, analytics, or reporting. I think with a lot of our work, so we've been engaged with regulators since we were a very young company, very much representing what was possible to achieve when it came to things like regulatory reporting. One of the things that we presented at Davos this year was very much, part of our technology that allows us to turn the legislation into code, which is pretty groundbreaking. And, I think a lot of the reason that we've been allowed to bloom, I really think is a big testament of the UK and the fact that, we are leaders in innovation. We're in the process of opening an office in New York and in Singapore, but our headquarters are going to stay here. And we're very proud of being, UK PLC type company. We've opened an office in France already as well. And I guess that what's been interesting for us is that in many ways, actually, Project Innovate at the FCA started pretty much the same month or within a couple of months of our company. And so from, a very early, stage of our company, we had very great relationships with that team. We've really seen in many ways the regulators here almost being entrepreneurs within the large organizations that are the Bank of England and the FCA, and individuals kind of bringing this like movement internally of those organizations, which is a lot harder to do than when you're trying to do it in other environments. Being actually quite successful at demonstrating that the regulators themselves had to become leaders in innovation, and I think that is a huge differentiator in terms of what we have access to as fintechs here versus the rest of the world. And so, touching upon the four elements that Alex mentioned in his presentation, I think, the access to regulator, that piece, it's uncomparable to the rest of the world. I mean, you have obviously some other regulators who have been also very welcoming to a fintech dialogue. But, the FCA, for example, having been, one of the first ones, if anything, a pioneer in this space, has almost like set the tone for the rest of the world as to how to do that. The sandboxing environment, I mean, that's literally just one element of what those different teams are actually doing within the regulators when it comes to innovation. We think it's, very exciting. We'll probably have opportunities a bit later to kind of go through over the responses from the poll answers as well. I think that, from my perspective, like the sandboxing piece, is very interesting, but there are other things that we could also be doing, which, is some of the things we'll discuss a bit later. I think from the FCA's perspective and the Bank of England's perspective, having more innovation support internally is very important. But what I would also like to see is having more tech talent internally, because I think that if we want to be a tech nation, you actually need to have that tech talent and groom that tech talent to be able to have the right conversation. Because technology, whether you're talking about NLP, AI, cloud, all of these things, is actually filled with detail that to really nail, you cannot do high level. You really need practitioners to be able to opine on that. And then the international expansion element, I mean, I think we're a demonstration that it's very possible to do out of here, if not easier. We're very keen. I think there's a reality where, with Brexit, the community of fintechs were a bit worried originally. But I think that it's been, demonstrated in the past 2 years that nothing really has changed. Our community, in the scene is just so strong, whether it is having the support of people, like Magdalena and Steven, from the innovation side, from the banks, or, the work that we can be doing with the likes of, Alex from a PA consulting piece, the fact that we have, like FinTech friends, like entrepreneurs that have been on this journey that we can talk to, that we can ask questions to. I travel around the world and there's nothing like what we have in the UK. And that community, right, for me, very often it makes me think as to what happened in Silicon Valley in the early 2000s. And it's so important to kind of understand how important that cross-pollination of minds and of thinking, the power that it has to create some top world-class companies. And that's from my perspective, that's why I'm so proud to be a UK entrepreneur, and I'm so proud to always support the reality about how meritocratic this market is to allow you to grow from a young company to something that can really take over the world.
Fantastic. Thank you, Diana. And just one follow-up question for you as well, if I may. This, you described your business model as turning legislation into code. And I guess there are many regulators around the world who would be very nervous about that. Have you found that there is generally a more open attitude to the use of technology because of the infrastructure that's been set up?
Yeah, I think that the technology in general, if you don't understand what it is, can make anyone nervous, any part of it, right? So automation can make people nervous. I think that the reality, though, is that from a lot of regulators' perspectives, and obviously I don't want to talk on their behalf, but there is a reality that, if you think about doing that kind of work manually, which is what usually is done in the industry, the amount of human error, we're not talking about interpretation, we're talking more about the fact that you have to fundamentally codify things in thousands and thousands of lines of code. So either you're doing it manually or you're doing it through automation and NLP. There's not a lot of people that can do that, right? So a lot of the success we've had as a company is because we have IP and groundbreaking technology. But I think that there is a reality that everyone is acknowledging that doing these things manually introduces a huge operational risk. And to be able to accelerate the pace of the production and to basically be able to test technology and code, rather than having things that are just in someone's head when it comes to compliance, it's a much better way to and cleaner way, I guess, to analyze the regulation than the way that it currently is, which is, it makes some like spreadsheets, or, I have a huge dependency on key man dependency on how one person has interpreted something versus how, if you get audited 5 years down the line, if that person is not in the firm anymore, how did, a particular financial institution decide to do one thing or another? So removing that, manual risk in the process of regulatory, submission and regulatory, approaches is a huge benefit, because then practitioners, instead of being worried that someone has forgotten a negative sign or something trivial that you can get fined for, can actually be focusing on the input, which is usually your data, and the output, which is what you're actually submitting to the regulators. And technology is there not to replace, above all when it comes to regulation, not to replace the quality of the interpretation and the expertise and the knowledge that we have as humans, but to actually enhance that and give you the kind of tools that allow you to do the right and correct submission without being at risk of actually having done too much manual processing in between. So it reduces operational risk, and I think that that's something that regulators are quite aware of, including obviously all our clients and a lot of the financial industry.
And Stephen, you're on the other side of that equation, because you've got to take those new technologies either in the customer facing side of the business or alternatively in the operational side of the business. Has the environment that we've built up in the UK, do you think, been beneficial for Santander? And how do you think we take that forward to the next step?
Well, good morning, everyone. Just give a bit of context to the role I play at Santander. I'm the Director of Innovation at Santander. I picked up that role about 3 years ago. Been in financial services for nearly 20 years and a variety of roles right across the businesses I've been in. I'll pick up on those two questions in just a moment if I can, Marcus. I think hopefully we'll pick up on some things related to COVID and how that's kind of driven almost like a decade of digitalization in a matter of, like, I think you said 102 days. I think that will have a material impact on some of the way the UK FinTech market evolves and how consumers respond and banks respond, and all participants in the sector kind of evolve the models and the way they collaborate, because it's been such a sizable change. I think we'll pick up on that, I believe, in some of the questions we've got later. My reflection, I think, and I've been fairly privileged to have been part of some of the very early sessions way back in the BBA when the Reg Sandbox was first discussed, right through to where we are now, to have seen how that whole journey has evolved. And it is really clear that by starting it early, it's enabled the UK to mature its understanding, learn together, and create a way of collaborating. And the collaboration has driven out lots of cases that have failed and lots of cases that have worked well. And being able to take the learnings from those and apply them to the next case, I think gives the UK years of advantage over others. So there's a lot of mistakes other markets will need to make to learn from the practicalities of doing what we've done over recent years. And I think to that end, that's partly why it's admired and role models in other countries. And I feel that because part of my role also connects into our group innovation team. And we're in 10 markets globally. And when the teams from Brazil or Mexico or Chile reach out to me and talk about how has this been done in the UK, how do you work with the regulator, it's a reflection of not me talking to them about the things we've been achieving, but that news permeating out across other markets. It's a reflection of how that soft power has reached that far. A couple of things from a report that came out, not to cover things that have been so articulately picked up by Alex, Magdalena and Diana, but a couple of points I would highlight is the skills and talent, I think, is a real challenge. I know it's picked up in some other work TC UK have done. There's a skills task force at a UK level. The digitalization, the kind of transformation during COVID means every sector will be pushing for the same skills. It'll be defence, it'll be pharma, it'll be retail. Everybody wants the same capabilities. Now, for UK FinTech to remain competitive, for the regulators, for the banks, for the new entrants to have access to that talent, that's something we're going to have to address if we want to keep that strategic advantage in the UK. I think that's also really important for then all participants in the ecosystem we've got to help to move things quickly through an approval process, whether that's through the engagement with the regulator, whether it's FinTech, whether it's collaboration between a big player or an established bank. That could be our internal governance processes and how we have the talent to make sure we can move things quickly so we can get things to market, or it could be how we work with the regulator and ensure that all the touch points that we have the skills and capabilities to understand what we're trying to achieve and therefore help us to get to the outcome that we want. And whether that's an outcome that's shared for the industry, some of the financial crime challenges, AML, for example, or whether it's actually genuine, competitive, bleeding edge innovation that a bank is trying to deliver or a FinTech is trying to deliver to transform the market, that I think is hugely important. And that probably leads me into my other point, perhaps around the connection between players and the regulator, is actually having the right tools. I think I really welcome the fact that the digital sandbox is being accelerated now. And it's great to see that picked up at the some of the Innovate finance sessions during May. And I think that because actually, as we start to try and scale up and expand how easy it is to test and experiment, it's important to have the right tools to enable that to happen without the burden necessarily of lots of people having to be involved. So being able to access the right data, I think Alex highlighted like pensions, for example, or being able to, in an anonymized fashion from multiple players that mean I can run some experiments and learn, takes the burden off of those 100 people having to be the face contact for every single FinTech that approaches the regulator. And I think what it's starting to show is then like a very early stage idea generation can lead to experimentation in a digital sandbox. You can move through to more structured engagements like things like the tech sprints. And based on things that come out of that, you can move closer into Reg Sandbox. So actually start to build the pipeline. And there's sort of theory and principles of good innovation practice are actually, I think, one of the things that has been achieved really well and pragmatically being applied in the market. And it's really difficult to do that. And I think that's one of the reasons the UK stands out above others. So I won't cover any more because I think hopefully we get into the questions and the feedback from the polls. I believe we can all sort of share some other insights about our own experiences from there. But I hope that helps, Marcus.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. And just picking up on that COVID thought, I'm just one kind of follow-on question for you is I guess you must have seen during this period, you've had to get a lot of colleagues retasked on new areas of activity where they may have not been previously engaged and having to pick up new skills and a whole variety of different new ways of doing things. How have you been able to do that at scale? Because I guess that is also a kind of key challenge.
I guess I wouldn't say it's necessarily been easy, but I think what it's highlighted is the power of an organisation that's got a very clear focus. And that's focus from the executive right down to those people that are supporting our customers. And ensuring then that all of the capabilities we need to ensure our services through our branches, through our contact centres, through our digital services, through scaling up things like chat, enable at the point a customer has a need, whether it's somebody who wants a mortgage holiday, payment holiday, or it's one of our small business clients, that they can get access to the information they need. And with the volume of contact we've had, actually connect them to the right digital experience. And that's been, I guess, incredibly valuable, because at a time when banks and fintechs are facing the same challenges everyone else is facing in their life, people are getting sick, people are working from home. Actually, it's the reliance on digital, the reliance on chatbots to help provide information has accelerated people's ability to get the insight they need. So I think moving vast amounts of our workforce out to work remotely, I guess the response we've had has been exceptional. I mean, our teams have responded well. Our customers understand some of the challenges that have been faced. We've been able to reach vulnerable customers at times when they've needed it in places where they haven't previously experienced engaging with the bank. So yeah, I'd say it's really driven that decade of digitalization experience. I think in that 100 days has transformed the way consumers engage with a bank, the way that bank engages with businesses, the maturity of the technology, the dialogues in chatbots, and so on and so forth. So I think it's been hugely powerful, and it's very clear that beyond COVID, there will be a different environment for us all to operate.
Thank you, and I just want to come back to that in terms of the kind of next steps. But we've just had a couple of questions from the audience, and just one from Ruishan, which has come up, which I think is very topical. It might be quite controversial, but it's certainly very topical. What lessons do you think we can learn from the collapse of Wirecard in terms of financial regulation and supervision? Alex, I'm going to pick on you to start off with, if that's okay. But what do you think some of the lessons are that we might be able to learn from any collapse of any business? But I guess as a very topical one.
Yeah, I thought you might be picking on me, Marcus. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's a really good question, really topical one. I think what's important to kind of remember is this is not something new or something that's not been experienced before. I mean, there's good reason why banks and regulators have high standards around what suppliers they can use and look at the sort of resilience issues that brings. So I think what Wirecard shows is that how integrated new fintechs are in the market now, and that they now are sort of underpinning the ecosystem that's out there. So it's important that there is that robust regulation around that. I think that kind of brings into focus. But ultimately, it's not something new. What we're seeing here is a company that is a supply chain of a number of institutions failing, and that has big ripple effects and impacts on customers, which is why the regulators look at that closely and regulate for that.
Brilliant. And Magdalena, I wonder, we've got a brand new CEO of the FCA, Nikhil Rathi, who'll be starting later on this year. He's joining at a time of great change. Given your experience of the Sandbox, and you think and what you've seen works well and what needs to be improved, what would you give him as his sort of first 3 things that he should achieve in his first 100 days?
Oh, wow. Well, I definitely think that the one of the big things are the digital capability and accelerating, delivering kind of resource and support through more digital channels. Like, I see that very much in terms of how we want to accelerate innovation within the bank, and in a way it is actually comparable, and taking a digital first approach in terms of how do we help the broader organization think about implementing innovation into its day-to-day. So it's innovation mindset, and it's actually empowering he wants to empower his whole organization to be able to deliver more innovation into the market. The second thing I would probably think that he would focus on is to kind of really focus on that technical connectivity as well. So obviously FCA, everyone has a very, very good understanding of the regulatory aspects. And when we look and review these new fintechs, it's really about understanding the technology that underpins it as well. And that's complicated. It's not easy. And how do you help your organization and the talent that you have in your organization to really feel confident with assessing technology as much as assessing the regulatory frameworks. So I'm going to leave it at that with 2 recommendations for him.
Brilliant. Well, I think that gives them a good place to start. And Diana, I wonder if I could turn to you. Given the need for regulatory reporting to be digitalized and automated, and that's a massive priority for most firms, given the amount of money they spend employing those people, what advice would you give to the new CEO of the FCA to make his priorities for his first 100 days or 150 days or however long you'd give him?
Yeah, so I would say that the point around getting the right technical understanding is actually quite important, because there is a lot of detail around digitizing things in general, and so I would say that surrounding yourself with that kind of talent of people that are actually practitioners is quite important, and that's going to be from my perspective like priority number 1. The other part I would say is to really get to grasp with what operational risk is all about. So if you think about the realities of operational risk and the trade-off between that kind of manual work versus something that is automated, and if you want your industry in the UK to go in the direction of being more digital, then to really understand how operational risk is actually defined within the industry is quite important, because if you understand that in the detail, then you can also make sure that you're promoting fintech and you're promoting innovation in the right kind of language, because very often you have financial institutions that mention operational risk as to one of the reasons to not adopt technology, whereas it's really the contrary. When you look at what the Basel definition of operational risk, it literally drives for more technology rather than less. And so I think that being, as a regulator, like an active advocate of that understanding that basically technology helps to reduce that, I think is quite important. And then I would say that another part is actually very much around how they interact with the fintech. So I think we have fantastic access in the UK to regulators, for sure, relative to the rest of the world, but it's still very difficult for startups and tech companies to actually work directly with the regulators. And I think that there is a reality around finding successful ways of procurement or of methods of working, where maybe you can pair I guess the talent that you find in a fintech with the talent that you find with more experienced practitioners, whether it's consultants or larger companies, and making that actually like almost a procurement business model, as as a way to onboard, and work with more fintechs is actually quite a powerful approach, because a lot of this tech talent that, Stephen was mentioning as well before, doesn't want to work necessarily in a super large corporate organization. A lot of this tech talent loves being in a tech kind of environment, in a startup environment, and I think that that's something that it's very difficult to capture that if you're never working with them directly as well. So finding ways to procure tech companies, to actually work with them, to almost go through the same journey that the institutions you're supervising go through. Like Magdalena was mentioned, there's a lot of technical detail that goes into this analysis of due diligence. The regulators have to get their hands dirty at that level if they want to properly supervise the fintechs that should be supervised because they present a risk to consumers, which is the case for something like Wirecard, and to support the fintechs that can actually help the enterprise space that we have in the financial industry. So it's just a reality of just getting deeper, which the devil is in the detail when it comes to technology.
Yeah. Brilliant. And then, Stephen, we've seen so many large corporates try and recreate that kind of innovative tech environment by either having, their own incubators, or by working with startups, but sort of leaving the startups to get on with it and be able to behave like startups whilst being part of a bigger corporate. What do you think that the FCA could do to help that? And then just a second question about what you mentioned about data earlier on is do you think that there should be should it be part of the objectives of the new CEO to get some kind of data sandbox, or expand the kind of data sets that the regulator can provide?
Okay, let me take those questions back to front. I'll pick up on the data one first if I can, because I think the journey started with the digital sandbox. I think moving down a pathway, picking out some key areas where whether it's fintechs, whether it's collaborations, or identifying that they would like to experiment more, whether it's in pensions, open banking data, financial crime, focus on one or two, build up some anonymized data sets, start to identify some problems that need solving, and encourage people to come to that sandbox, access the data, test the capabilities they've got, and take those learnings forward. And I think one of the points the report picks up on is the opportunity to observe the outcomes and actually get closer to what you learn, to then establish what may be able to pull through that funnel a little bit further into more structured engagements like the tech sprints, and then to the reg sandbox as things get closer to live in market. So my suggestion there would be to accelerate what's already started and is underway, because I think that's a great step forward. And I think it can be quite powerful as well internationally, with other players potentially entering the UK market to enable quick and early experimentation in that regard. I think in terms of innovation and innovating as a large firm and organisation, it's I think one of the things that I believe is happening, and I think COVID has helped to accelerate as well, is a real awareness of the power of digitalisation and the need to innovate, and the power that some of the new entrants have because of the quality and the speed with which they can adapt and change, whether it's the digital front end they have with the customer, or the effectiveness of their cost model, because every part of their process is digitalized end to end. So I think that's helped to accelerate a broader understanding in our company of the power of digital and the power then of innovation. One of the points I'd probably pick up on in regard to how we would focus, or what areas I would encourage a closer look, would be the theme in the report, which picks up on, and to quote it, regulated firms that want to use innovative solutions to bear the full regulatory burden, making it difficult for them to fully implement new technology. So where a firm is regulated and supervised at an entity level, all of the activity, innovation slightly away from the core and in collaboration with fintechs, is subject to very tight scrutiny end to end, from the idea right through to launch with customer. I think the opportunity to look more closely at how the activity is regulated and supervised, and how we learn about that activity, whether you're a fintech or a large entity, or you're collaborating to deliver something, I think could help to accelerate innovation in the interest of good outcomes for customers and enable better and faster learning. Our experience tells us that if we were to be running some of the same ideas and opportunities we've looked at internally, if we were running them as a fintech, we could run maybe 2 to 3 times faster, because we don't have the same hoops or governance or compliance or controls or checks to jump through. And that's not sitting moaning about the fact that it's hard for a bank to innovate. It's highlighting that the UK has an opportunity to continue to lead with innovation in financial services. And if it does that, it's going to come from fintechs and banks operating alone and fintechs and banks operating together.
Brilliant, thank you. And Alex, I wonder if you could wrap us up. What would be your 2-3 points for Nikhil as he starts his new role as the CEO of the FCA? How are we going to shape the next 5 years for financial regulation, taking into account what all of the other panelists have said?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to listen to everyone, so thank you for all the comments. I think sort of just coming back to probably the salient point in the report, I think let's not forget the great work that the regulators and government have done in the UK to really get us where we are, and I think that sets us up very strongly for success. What there is now is a massive opportunity to keep pushing forward and driving innovation within that, and I think the report kind of highlights some really good areas to focus on there. The two sort of things I'd probably focus on domestically would be, there's a big opportunity to build out the sandbox and take that from where it is now and take it to the next phase, which would really drive and foster and encourage innovation. And I think Stephen's touched on a few points there and how that would work. The other thing that we often find is that banks rightly have very high and robust procurement standards, and then when engaging with fintechs, it can be quite draining for them, and they get squeezed almost with a breaking point when they have to kind of go through those procurement processes. So making it easier for them to get through that, but also while maintaining the integrity and robustness of those standards, which is important, would be key. The second point, I think, is the one we've talked about around the skills gap and disseminating that centre of excellence or knowledge that currently sits within the innovation functions down to the more sort of BAU functions of the regulator, so your authorization units, your supervisory units, or your enforcement units. And I think it's really important, as new and emerging technologies are becoming more and more prevalent, that the people who are responsible for overseeing the sector and maintaining the safety and soundness of it really understand what sits behind that. So I do think disseminating the capability that sits in those areas and continuing to upskill will be really key, so that we can continue to move forward. But yeah, like I said, I think we're incredibly well positioned to do so, and building off a really strong foundation, which is fantastic.
Brilliant. Well, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Alex, Diana, Stephen, and Magdalena, for your participation and for your contribution today. Really, really appreciate it. It's been a fascinating insight into what's going on in the industry from the perspective of both fintechs and from the large company side as well. So thank you all very much, and thank you to our audience as well, and wish you a good rest of the day. Cheers. Thank you.